Welcome, brothers and sisters. I am your host, your brother, your professor, Mr. O'Neill Barnaby, founder and director of the Black Math Academy, here with another video trying to rebuild intelligent black society through mathematics. All right, so today I'm going to be discussing a concept called number theory. I'll talk about the different types or kinds of numbers that exist, and I'm going to show you the pecking order with which these numbers belong to. All right, so on your marks, get set, let's go. So number theory. Number theory is a branch of mathematics that talks about the properties and the relationships between numbers. More specifically, positive numbers, but numbers in general. So what I'll do is talk about the different types of numbers that exist and define them for you and show you where they belong in the hierarchy. All right, so first up, the first type of number that exists is called real. Okay? Real numbers are just about every number that you can think of. They're positive, negative, they're whole numbers, they're decimals, fractions, radicals. Basically, anything that's not imaginary is a real number, hence the difference between those two terms. I'll talk about imaginary numbers in a little bit. But real, the definition of real is basically not imaginary. Oopsies, not imaginary. So a couple examples like I showed you before, positives and negatives, fractions, decimals, and radicals. Those are all different types of real numbers. Okay? So real number is the main category. Beneath real, it gets split into two categories. Over here we have rational, and over here we have irrational. All right. So to help differentiate between the difference of these two, you can use the dictionary's definition of rational and irrational. Rational, like a rational human being, would be someone who thinks properly or logically. It makes sense. So a rational number would be exactly that, a number that makes sense. So let me put it over here. Rational. By definition, what a rational number is a number that can be written in fraction form. So it can be written as an A over B as long as B does not equal 0. So a rational number is a number that can be turned into a fraction in some way where the denominator, which is what B is, does not equal 0. The reason being is because if B were to be 0, if you divide by 0, you get a concept that doesn't make any sense. In mathematics, they'll use phrases like error or syntax, doesn't exist, indeterminate, undefined. Those are all values or terms, rather, when you divide by 0. Okay? So a rational number is a number that can be turned into a fraction, basically. So it makes sense. Now, irrational would be the very antithesis of rational. Since rational means makes sense, irrational would mean doesn't make sense. So you're a little loony. So irrational, let me do the definition over here. An irrational number where you cannot write a fraction. All right, so an irrational number will be a number that cannot be put into fraction form. Some examples of that would be numbers like the square root of 2, the square root of 3, pi, Euler's number, if you don't know what that is. It's the letter E. But all those numbers cannot be put into fraction form. So to give you a bit of an example to explain that, the number pi is approximately 3.14. But actually, it's a number where the decimal part of it continues on forever, but there's no distinguishable pattern between those decimals. So it goes 3.14, 157, and just goes on infinitely, but there's no pattern between the numbers. And the fact that there's no pattern is what makes it irrational. In contrast, a number like 2/3, if you were to actually divide those two and put it into decimal form, it would be 0.6 repeating itself. So it would be 0.6666. It just goes on forever. But there is a pattern within that. The six is just repeating themselves, so it's over and over and over again. And that pattern is what suggests that it's a rational number now, because we can put it into fraction form, which is what we did. It started out as 2/3 at first. So there's your concrete example of the difference between rational and irrational. All right. Next up, beneath rational, you have integer. All right. So in integer, or integers rather, they have three characteristics. They are positive numbers, they are negative numbers, and they're also whole numbers. So like that, integer are positive, negative, and whole. All right, so that's what an integer is. But in life, sometimes there are exceptions to every rule. And when it comes to integers, there is an exception. The number 0 would be included in the value, in the category that is integer. Even though the value 0 is not positive, it's not negative, but it is considered to be a whole number, because if you take 0 and divide by whatever you want to divide by, you'll get another whole number as an answer, which would be 0 again. So that is what makes it an integer, because it is really a whole number to begin with. So let me add that, and also 0. All right, so beneath integer, the next category is whole. All right, now what defines a whole number? Basically, whole numbers are numbers that start from 0 and include every whole number after that. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. All those values would be whole numbers. All right, so whole starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, and continues on forever. So that's what a whole number is. Basically from 0 above that, and as you notice, they're, for the most part, they're positive numbers. They're not negative numbers. All right, so beneath the category whole, we have what's called natural. Right? Natural numbers are sometimes called counting numbers as well. You'll probably you heard that phrase, counting numbers, when you're like in elementary school in that regard. But a natural number or a counting number is basically that. The numbers you use to count something. So if you had, a bunch of money, you're counting all the dollars, you wouldn't start with 0 to count the first thing that you have. You would start with the value 1. So a natural number are numbers that start from 1 and go to 2, 3, 4, and continue on after that. So that is what natural numbers are. They're basically counting numbers, and counting numbers, you start with the number 1 and just go through every integer after that as you increase. So that's what a natural number would be. What you're not taught in school often enough, or at least in some classes, there is actually another category within this hierarchy. It's actually above the category real. Above this category, we have what's called complex. All right. So we have something called complex numbers that exist in mathematics. And a complex number is a number where you're adding two values. One of them is a real number and one of them is an imaginary number. So let me write that here. complex, there are numbers where they're written in the form a plus bi. All right. Let me explain it a little more in the middle here. So a plus bi. Let's see. This is what's called a complex number. All right. So the a part is the imaginary part, and A is the real part. Excuse me, and b is the imaginary part. This imaginary part, or I, is the imaginary number, and where it comes from is when you try to take the square root of a negative number. Since by definition you can't do that, there was this cat named Leonard Euler who came up with this concept. But let's say you could find an actual answer to that problem, the square root of a negative number. What would it be? Well, he called it I. So I is equal to the square root of -1. And then from there on, he could then come up with a whole bunch of rules and a whole new concept of how to deal with numbers like that. I won't talk about that today. I'll probably do that in another video into more detail about what imaginary numbers are. But to explain this a little more, if the real part, or this a value, were to be 0, it would say 0 plus bi. And because bi remains, that's imaginary. So when it comes to complex numbers, it would stay in that category because it's not a real number. The imaginary part still exists. In contrast, if b were to be 0, 0 times I is 0, and 0 plus a is a. So the real part would then exist now. The imaginary part would disappear. So that would drop that kind of number back to the real category because the imaginary part doesn't exist. So that's why complex numbers are the top category, because every number that exists can be written in that way. All right. So that's me, the Black Math Academy, dropping bombs out here like Funk Flex out here. Just wanted to make sure you guys understand that we are clear, we are concise, we are articulate, and we know what we're talking about. So the Black Math Academy is your premier source for mathematics tutoring. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to all of our social media pages, our Facebook, our Instagram, and our YouTube. Always remember that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Take it easy, y'all.